Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. I'm here with Mr. Power. Is that really your last name, Tony? That is a fantastic last name.
It really is my last name. It's actually quite a popular name in Ireland. If you go to Wexford and Waterford, there's Powers everywhere. So it is my real name. I didn't choose it.
I have to ask you, can you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Happy to. My name is Tony Power. I'm a member of the Whitechapel Society, and actually, I'm the Master of Ceremonies for the Whitechapel Society. So we meet every 2 months in a nice pub in the East End of London near Whitechapel, where we have a variety of talks. A number of authors come and talk about their books, and I introduce them and we quiz them. So. That's myself. Yeah. So I mean, I have to be honest. Like I said, I'm not a researcher. I haven't written any books, but I have an interest, and I'm just happy to share that with you.
Now, where did your interest stem from? And also, are you surprised at the number of people that are interested in the Jack the Ripper case? I didn't know it was a lot like the JFK community, which you're also part of Dealey Plaza UK, who talks and studies and does a lot of research on the JFK assassination as well.
That's a really interesting question. You're quite right. I mean, my interest was actually quite random. When I speak to most of the people in the Whitechapel Society, a lot of them came to the subject through the Michael Caine miniseries, which was came out in 1988, which was 100 years after the incidences. So, but for me, I was just watching a documentary on TV, and a question came up, and I Googled it, and I ended up finding the Whitechapel Society. And so I went along and I was made to feel really welcome. It's a really friendly group. And I found out so much about the history of the East End of London and about Jack the Ripper through the society. So that's where it came from. But it's the other question you asked me there was, am I surprised about the interest? I am actually surprised. I think it is amazing that people are hugely interested in this subject. Robbie, if you were to go down to Whitechapel any night of the week, you will see literally five, six, seven different tours going on about Jack the Ripper. They're jostling for position in Mitre Square. So it's a huge interest, not just in the UK, but outside of the UK as well. So and I'll tell you why I think it's interesting, Robbie. I think we haven't got an answer. And I think it's an unsolved mystery, and that kind of interests people, isn't it? I often wondered if we had a resolution, if a document appeared and it showed here it is, without doubt it is him, would interest wane? Because we know who it is. Because obviously there's been other serial killers, but the interest doesn't seem to have sustained. But with Jack the Ripper, it really, really does.
Do you think that people would be satisfied if there was a document or something that came out that named a certain suspect? Because we have the Aaron Kosminski situation where there's blood splatter, DNA, and a lot of people are just not about it. They're refuting it.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. Would we meet? Would we meet every couple of months in Whitechapel if we knew the answer? Honestly, I think we would like to know the answer. We would love there to be a document that would be discovered somewhere in some attic that shows categorically this person looks like they were. And at the moment, I don't think there kind of is. There's a great researcher who's well known in the field called Donald Rumbelow, who's written a number of books on it. He's an ex-police officer, and I saw him being interviewed, and he was saying that as a police officer, he had access to police files. And he could go in and find where the Jack the Ripper files were, and he found that they were missing, they were gone. And he knew personally that people had taken them, police officers had taken them. They were taken. And the other thing you have to remember, and it sounds appalling now, Robbie, but when the police needed more space in their files, they went down to this area where there were Jack the Ripper documentation, and they said, "What's that?" "Oh, that's the Jack the Ripper stuff." "Oh, well, we can get rid of that. That's 1888. We can just get rid of it." So would you believe it was just a lot of it was destroyed because, well, we don't need that. It's an old cold case. But having said that, I think that there may well be somebody out there who's got a relative who was a police officer who whenever that took some files home for a memorabilia. They may be out there. They may be out there. So, and I think people would love to know the answer.
Do you believe anything with the blood analysis on Kosminski, or you just think it's
I
interesting?
think I think the Kosminski thing is interesting, and obviously the Kosminski is what we would call a credible suspect. And certainly Russell Edwards was saying on your podcast, the police certainly felt that he was one of the suspects. But I think the difficulty that a lot of us have with it is what's the credibility of the shawl? What's the provenance of that shawl? Because that shawl was not listed and in anywhere to say that that was Catherine Eddowes in Mitre Square. We found her shawl. That shawl wasn't there. The police officer that found the shawl, that wasn't his beat. What was he doing there? So there's a question mark about the shawl. Now I think Russell Edwards done a great job, and obviously he's done a huge amount of analysis with, his and his research. But I think for a lot of us, there's question marks about the provenance. In a way, Robbie, it reminds me a lot of Patricia Cornwall. I'm not sure. Have you read any of her
Yeah, yeah.
story? Because it's similar. Because and again, it's a great book, a really good read. She writes beautifully. But the what's the provenance of the letters? Because she analysed the paper, she analysed the ink, and then she started to draw the fact that actually this could, Walter Sickert used that kind of paper. Walter Sickert was the kind of man that would write letters. But the problem you've got with the letters is that how many of them, if any, are genuine? There isn't any, and certainly talking to colleagues and people in the community, there's a feeling. Well, maybe the letter that went to Mr. Lusk, the 'cause that came with half a human kidney, and that human kidney did seem to fit Catherine Eddowes because she was missing one on that side. There was a female kidney, and it was from somebody who was what's called a Ginny kidney. So, I mean, was it from Catherine Eddowes? We can't be totally sure. But the thing about that letter, actually, Robbie, was that it wasn't signed Jack the Ripper. It was signed from hell. But even then, we're not sure it could be medical students having a lark. So the provenance of the shawl is a question mark. And the provenance of the letters and analysis on the letters, I think, is a question mark. Great work, but how can you be sure that it was written by him, by Jack the Ripper?
That's why I get hesitant on getting a document or something naming the person after the fact, because I think the From Hell letter and then the From Boss letter, I was asked if I believed that those were from Jack the Ripper, and I was like, I don't know. It came after the fact, and I think one of the issues is that trying to find something, whether it's the JFK case or the Jack the Ripper case, is if you are still looking for a suspect, you can pick it seems like they just pop out of nowhere. I think there's over hundreds of suspects in the Jack the Ripper case, but a lot of the evidence and stuff comes after the fact, which makes it almost impossible to trust.
It's really interesting you should say that because I got just ahead of us chatting. I've just got this book out. It's called Jack the Ripper: The Celebrity Suspects. Man alive, Robbie! Everybody who was alive was a suspect. Queen Victoria, Joseph Merrick, the Elephant Man. Charles Parnell, Irish politician. Um, Walter Sickert, King Leopold II, the barbaric beast of the Belgian Congo. Do you know? Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, Rasputin. I mean, the suspects just go on and on. General William Booth, the person who created Salvation Army, he's a suspect. It's Lewis Carroll was a suspect. So there are as many suspects as there are researchers, I think.
I guess from kind of looking at the Whitechapel Society and kind of being involved in the Jack the Ripper kind of group and community, what is the least likely suspect for you, or one that you heard that just doesn't seem like has any weight to it?
I think there is a Montague John Druitt. And again, Montague John Druitt was one of the suspects that the police felt was credible. I think a lot of that lent on the fact that Montague John Druitt was found drowned in the River Thames near Chiswick, with stones in his pocket to weigh himself down. And that kind of coincided with the kind of end of the murders, if I can say that, because we don't really know whether they ever did end because we don't know who it was. But the timing, he was found, I believe, after Mary Kelly was murdered. And so, and there's that timing, which kind of think, well, it must be him then, because it kind of stopped after Mary Kelly. But there are other things that said he was sexually insane, which we kind of think maybe he could have been gay, because he was dismissed from a boys' school where he was a teacher. That could have been linked to that. So, but I think, again, when we have a conversation about this, Montague John Druitt, we don't really think he was a suspect. I think Walter Sickert, There's not really much clear evidence for Walter Sickert. I mean, again, it's a really nice book, the Cornwall book, and a really good read. But again, the evidence is on the fact that there was a painting that he painted that seemed to show it's nothing concrete. Mind you, there isn't much evidence in this case, actually, Robbie.
Well, what about the McNaughton memorandum?
Um,
There were
yeah,
three suspects listed. I think Aaron Kosminski was one, Michael Ostrog was one, and I can't remember if it's Tumblety or if it was John
Maybrick,
Druitt that was named.
Andrew, Michael Andrew. Um, I mean, again, it's speculation. That was that his idea. I mean, you may think actually, well, he was a police officer. He was he was involved in the investigation. He would know. But I mean, I think it's again, it's a memo in a margin. Is it evidence? Or is it evidence of his opinion? Um, Interesting find, but yeah.
Do you believe that the police named a suspect, and do you believe that one of those or any of those, or you just don't think they named anybody that is the actual
I
killer?
I don't think they did. I think that, and again, Russell touched on this when in your podcast with him. They did say that they knew who it was. Did they? They said they did. They said we knew who it was. And again, Russell mentioned the seaside home visit where somebody was brought, who said he saw somebody. And the guy refused to identify because again he was Jewish. So this is the allegation again. Is any provenance in that? So did the police know? They said they did. Um, but I don't believe they ever named anybody conclusively, But there were certainly a number of people that they did mention. Ostrog, I think, Kosminski was definitely mentioned. A Polish Jew was mentioned. There's no doubt about that. That's who they felt it was. But of course, with the policing itself, and we were just literally chatting just before we came on air, is the police were very new at this stage, Robbie. We're talking about 1888. They were brand new, and they were dealing with the first really serial killer. So what were they able to find him? I don't know.
What about the police when we talk about it, I guess from your understanding and looking at the Jack the Ripper case? I mean, where did you see deficiencies or where did you see problems? Because obviously a lot of things can get chalked up to, conspiracy stuff, whether it's the JFK case or whether it's the Jack the Ripper case. But if you honestly boil down to what's going on, it's like, well, you have a couple police people that are ahead of every investigation and they're just giving orders to other people that don't really have that much experience. And this is how we have this whole bungled case.
Yeah. Well, to be honest with you, I kind of feel that the police did the best they could at the time. I mean, I'm not really sure about how many times I can say they bungled. I certainly think the Goldstone Street graffito was unfortunate, the fact they didn't photocopy that. And as a result of not photographing that graffiti, there were three different versions of what that graffiti actually said. So maybe there, but apart from that, I think they did the best they could. And I think, even now when it comes to serial killers, they're really difficult to track down. Even with the technology that we have at the moment, it's not easy. So I honestly can't think of anything that they would have done that was messed up. They interviewed everybody that they could. Apart from the Golston Street graffiti, I can't think of anything else they did to mess up. To be fair, I think they did the best they could.
Do you think that Gold Street thing, if they would have left it up there instead of wiping down the graffiti, that it would have altered the case in any way, or maybe we would have less, I guess, criticism on certain aspects? Because the police do get, I think, even in the media, was hitting on the hardest. And you see that like cops, like they're drawn out in newspaper sketches, and they're like blindfolded walking,
Yeah,
like
that's a famous punch sketch.
so
Yeah,
it's like, I mean, I do agree with you. They were doing maybe the best that they could, but I think a lot of the times we don't really perceive it that way because we're not on that side of the fence. We're on the civilian side. You have a bunch of people back then that are worried about other people being killed. Are they next? So of course the police are going to get criticism. Then you have the media that's reporting on it. Like, how have you guys not found this person yet? They've killed however many people.
mm. And of course there was the leather apron issue, of course, where they felt that this guy called Leather Apron was the guy, but he turned out he wasn't. He had a cast iron alibi. So again, they found him, they tracked him down. Sergeant Thick found him, and he had an alibi. The interesting was the person that gave him the alibi was a police officer who said, "Yeah, I saw him on that night, one of the nights of the murders, and he was with, he was making a statement or he was talking to me." So they interviewed him and then they let him go. So yeah, I agree with you. I think they did the best job they could with the tools that they had. Um, and I mean, there is obviously a theory that it was a police officer. That's another theory.
I'm guessing because it's just a cover up of the fact that there's not a whole lot of cases in the world where we don't have like 100% this is the suspect. The unsolved stuff is always very fascinating to people, but that would make more sense if you looked at like police. Did they get rid of evidence on purpose? Was anything, and you get more nefarious with it. I don't necessarily believe that, but I think that, I mean, let's look at the technology back then. We're not having like FBI and, father in the, or eye in the sky or whatever, looking at you from every direction to be able to see where you're going.
Yeah, you're right. I think they didn't have very many tools, and in fact, in those days, they couldn't tell the difference between animal blood and human blood. They couldn't. That came later. So, which which is it just going to kind of gives you an idea about what the tools they were dealing with. But even like I say, without that, they did do the best they could. I think but again, there's another debating point, Robbie. The graffiti. Let me ask you: do you think that the graffiti was written by Jack the Ripper?
I don't know why you take the time to do that. It's like with the letters. Why would you take the time to write a letter? You know what I mean?
Really good point. I agree. I mean, initially I thought, yeah, it was because the only evidence that was really turned up was the shore, the bloody shore that was thrown into the Galton Street alleyway. That's the only real evidence that was found. And the Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. I think there is another interpretation of that. I'm not sure whether you've heard of this, and that the other interpretation of that is that it was written by somebody who was angry with one of the stall holders down Brick Lane. They may have bought something, they were not satisfied, they came back to get the money back, and the Jewish shopkeeper refused to give them the money back. And in a fit of pique, they wrote down the Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing. So it's no wonder people feel that about them because this is what happened to me. So there's a thing that was already there and that the shore was just thrown underneath it. And also I think you make a really good point. I mean, what if he's running from the police? There are police all over the place because don't forget, they're all over Elizabeth Stride's murder. So there are police are out in force in that area. Would he have taken the time to write that on the wall? I think it's doubtful. I think it's doubtful.
Yeah, I don't see it taking like 30 seconds. It'd probably take a little bit longer than that to get at least the full graffiti
Mm.
on the actual building. So,
Yeah. I mean, I think the amazing thing was he was never caught. I mean, wow, it must have been close. It must have been. But something else, again, I was listening to your interesting podcast with Russell Edwards, and he was talking about the fact that when you think about Jack the Ripper, I mean, this is the guy you think of, the top hat, the cane, the watch chain. And I think I agree with Russell. There's no way that he was dressed like that. Whatever you can say about Jack the Ripper, he blended into the background. He was blended in. So he wouldn't have had a top hat, a cane, a bag, a watch chain, because he would have been, remember, Whitechapel was an incredibly dangerous place. It's high poverty, high unemployment, and people were robbed on a regular basis. So he wouldn't have dressed like that, I don't believe, and I believe he just melted into the background. So, and remember, even though it was the early hours of the morning or even late at night, there would have been a lot of people traffic on the roads in Whitechapel. People would have been getting up to go to an early job or finishing a late job and going home. There would have been people wandering around. So he would have blended into the background.
the top hat and kind of iconic version that we know of Jack the Ripper, I like to think of it as separating the Whitechapel murders and the Jack the Ripper scenario. The Jack the Ripper is like media adding on to what the Whitechapel murders are. Because if we're not talking about he doesn't have a top hat, he doesn't. I only know one suspect that has a top hat. I think it's Michael Flattery is his name. The Mike Tumblety is his name. Michael Flattery wrote a book about him. There's that guy makes sense with the if you want to go to the iconic Jack the Ripper, but then if you really examine, maybe he didn't have these things. Maybe he was just an average person. Maybe he had some type of above knowledge on certain things. I mean, what's your opinion on the whole organ harvesting? That was always the hardest for me to try and understand why there was certain organs being taken out. Because obviously, if you dive into Jack the Ripper, you get the satanic thing, which I haven't really ever talked about, and I don't think there's anything to it, but I will say that there's very few people that know exactly what ovaries look like. So, especially at that time, I mean, I don't know how available medical knowledge was or books like that. Brings up the point, did he have medical knowledge? I mean, I don't know, but it would be the only thing that I could explain about how he would be even able to identify that this is a kidney, this is that, and this is that. I mean,
Yeah, I mean this is a really good point, and believe me, Robbie, the debate is raging on this. You know, you ask different people, you'll get different answers, and even at the time itself, if you look at the coroner's report, Win Baxter Edwards, I think his name was, he was talking. He mentioned the fact that he felt that these organs were being taken and sold to medical schools. Don't forget the London hospital is literally on Whitechapel High Street. You know, so there was that theory.
that happened
But
before too with the Bjork and Hare murders, if I believe that they were yeah, digging up
that
bodies
was
and selling it.
that's right, Burke and Hare. They used to dig up fresh bodies and sell them. Yeah, sell them to the local hospitals. Yeah. But I mean, I think was he a doctor? I mean, you're right, and I'm not really sure where I feel on this because you're right. That in order to get to some of these organs, you need to know where to go. You know, but the other theory is that, look, he didn't need medical knowledge. He was a slasher. Do you know, he got his knife and he just wielded it willy-nilly, and then he took out whatever he found. But I think there's merit in both of them. But going back to the coroner's report, there were two different doctors. One of them said that, yes, he felt he had medical knowledge, and the other doctor said, no, he had no medical knowledge. So you pay your money and take your choice on that. That's still being debated.
What has been a suspect for you that you feel like has the most weight to fit Jack the Ripper?
It's funny. I think really, you mentioned that you've read a few books on it, and I've read a few, and I think sometimes I read the book and I think, yeah, that's the one. You know, in fact, this is the one I first read, Philip Sugden, which is the complete history of Jack the Ripper. It's a really good book, and his suspect is Druitt. Actually, no, it's Chapman. I beg your pardon. His suspect was Chapman, and so I was a Chapman person for a while, but. Let me answer the question this way, Robbie. Only one man was ever found standing over a body. Okay. Only one man was ever found standing over a body. Okay. And that was Charles Lechmere. The very first murder, Bucks Row. Okay. Now, and if you read the stories, what they say is that Lechmere came around the corner and he found the body. And then Robert Paul came around the corner and he said, come over here, mate. Look what I found. But if you look at it another way, um, was it him? He was found standing over a body, you know. Now, he was found standing over a body. Him and Paul then, at the time, Paul actually put his hand on the body and he said he felt it was still warm. He felt there was some possible signs of life, possibly. If there was a heartbeat, he said it was only just. If she's alive, he said it's only just. And then they went off to find a police officer, and they did find a police officer. And in the meantime, another officer came around the corner and found it. They then called the local doctor, Llewellyn, Dr. Llewellyn, to come around and have a look. And he said she's been dead about 30 minutes. And guess who was standing over the body 30 minutes before? Lechmere was. So it's one of two things for me. Either it was him, or he literally just missed the Ripper. The Ripper must have done the job, murdered her, and then went off around the corner, and he just missed him. But it's one or the other. So I think many of us believe that Lechmere is a credible witness. Now, he's certainly credible for the first murder. Now, for the others, it's not as straightforward. But there are links certainly to Berners Street, which is where Liz Stride was murdered. He had his mother lived down there, or a relative lived down there. So, I mean, to be honest with you, the other ones are sketchier, but he's certainly a suspect for the first one, and I think he's a credible suspect.
I think Lechmere is a popular candidate for Edward Stowe, and then a bunch of others I've seen in the community and stuff like that. I've spoken to Edward Stowe. He brings up some good points on it. I'm not a big fan of the fact that he doesn't believe anything's weird about the JFK case. We went into that a little bit.
Oh, okay.
But there's a lot of things, I guess, when it comes to individuals and people who have been involved in studying this that have good points on all their suspects. whether it's anatomical knowledge, whether it's are they a local or not. I mean, I don't know. I kind of examining it. I'm like, I don't think he was local. I mean, I could see where he would understand the roads and streets better and be able to escape faster. But wouldn't it be easier if he was transient? And that's why we never caught him. I mean, I guess the main question would be, do you believe that there were murders before the canonical five, and do you believe that there was any after? Because if we find them in other locations, then we would know he might have been a transient.
Yeah, I do believe that there were more. I think just one more. I think Martha Tabram was a victim. I mean, she was stabbed 39 times, so she wasn't. There was no organs removed. You know, she wasn't kind of, forgive me, opened up, if you know what I mean. She wasn't like the other victims. But there's a lot. I think that that was maybe his first attempt. You know, and it got steadily worse as he progressed. So I think that that there's definitely one before. Were there some after? I think it's possible. Why would he stop? Serial killers don't tend to stop unless they're caught or they're you know, again, you know, this is where Kosminski comes in. He was put into an asylum. Um, but I think there may have been. I mean, there's another thing about, which I'm not sure whether how much you know about the Thames Torso murders that happened afterwards. Was was that, you know? I mean, and many people don't believe that these bodies that were found floating in the Thames, torsos, female torsos. Again, nobody was found for to have committed those. So was that him? Um, so I certainly think there's some before. Not sure about any afterwards.
Do you believe that the impact was so great of Jack the Ripper at the time that since he wasn't found, that there were other people trying to recreate certain things that he did? Because I see on Casebook Jack the Ripper, they have a list of suspects and then they have a list of potential suspects. Um, Mostly because there's certain candidates or victims or potential victims that have similarities after the Jack the Ripper murders that could be attributed to Jack the Ripper, but it was never conclusively proven. And they weren't necessarily didn't find the killer either. So for me, it's always weird because you're looking at them, you're like, it's crazy is we don't have like sketches or photos of a lot of these people. You're kind of just running off thin air here. So it's like, again, I mean, research back then, I'm not saying they need to document things. It's a good thing we do that now. But it makes the case a little bit more complicated because you're trying to find something that would stand out, that would give any other person or individual a red flag in their case. Like, that's how you know it's him.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess you're talking about the signature of the crime, aren't you? Really, you know, and this is where I think there was a signature. I think that there are, like I said earlier, there are many people who believe there was more than one murderer. There wasn't just one person. They were all different. And to go on to what you were just saying, they felt they were copycat killers, you know. And again, this is the thing about the whole Jack the Ripper sort of piece is that every theory is valid. No theory can really be discounted, to be honest with you. You know, everybody's got a valid opinion. So if anybody says, well, couldn't it have been this? Yes, it could. Yes, it could. Couldn't it have been a woman? Yes, it could. Jill the Ripper, yeah, a backstreet abortionist. I mean, I don't think people believe that, but there are some people who think it. I was having a chat with a woman once, and she was getting very excited about saying, "Well, it could have been a woman. Why couldn't it have been a woman?" And I said, "Look, I'm all for women's lib, but do you really want to claim this? You know, but it could have been. But I think certainly the FBI profile, and I think that's, I agree with this, is that it was a male. It was a male. Again, the theory was that maybe he had got syphilis from being with a prostitute, and if the advanced stages of syphilis leads to madness, you know, so that's a valid theory.
I think it probably is more likely a man just because of the fact that a lot of the killings or all the killings were women. Um, if you want to say prostitutes, or if you believe that there was some after, but I also think wasn't Elizabeth Stride or Long Liz? She was a lot taller than a lot of the other people around that time, so it would just make more sense if it was a man or if it was someone that could have. I'm not saying that men are stronger. I'm just saying that there's a genetic difference when it came to overpowering someone. And most crimes in like domestic situations is man on women. And I just think if it was a women Jack the Ripper, there'd probably be more men killed rather than females killed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the theory with Jill the Ripper, and forgive me, I haven't read an awful lot on this one, is that it was a backstreet abortionist who's trying to cover up the fact that she was doing a really bad job, you know. So again, it's a theory that's a theory. But I think you're right. I think we're looking at a male, and Yeah, deeply disturbed one as well at that. So yeah.
Do you believe that the double event was because he was caught in the middle of the act, or he didn't have enough time with the body?
I'd say you're asking really good questions. Yes, yeah, I actually think that Liz Stride was a victim. There are many people that don't, and I totally get it because unlike the others, Liz Stride's throat was cut and that was it. There was no other mutilations on the body as well. So I think there is a, I think that he was disturbed. I think Albert Kadosh came around the corner with his horse and cart, and lit a match to see who it was, and then he went in. And I think if Albert Kadosh had looked to his right, right behind the door, he may well have seen the face of Jack the Ripper right there. I mean, you can say this man was incredibly lucky, I think. And also with Chapman, if you remember, she was murdered in the backyard. Um, and there was somebody going to the toilet in the outside toilet in the back, and he heard a commotion and a body falling against the fence, and some woman's crying out, "No!" If he'd have looked over the fence, he may well have caught him. He may well have seen who it was. But I do think that Catherine Eddowes, although there's many people who believe that that was a domestic argument that got out of hand, but I think that she was a victim, and I think that. Because he wasn't able to mutilate, he went on to Mitre Square where he met poor Catherine Eddowes, you know, who I always feel sorry for. I feel sorry for all of them, Robbie. But Catherine Eddowes had a bit of cheekiness and cockiness about her. She had something, and she was unlucky. The way that she was arrested in the city of London. If she'd have been found 200 yards further up Whitechapel, she'd have been outside of the city of London, and she'd have been in the Metropolitan Police area. And with the Metropolitan Police, when you get arrested for drunk and disorderly, they keep you in overnight and they don't let you go until the next morning. The City of London Police, she was taken to a Bishopsgate police station, and with the City of London Police, when you sober up, they let you go. So if she'd have been 200 yards further back, she may not have been a victim. Yeah, but I do think that the Ripper was disturbed, and I think that he went on to continue to carry out a horrific murder against poor Catherine Eddowes. She was really badly mutilated,
One of the biggest
which is where, of course,
travesties.
yeah, this is where, and obviously her face was cut.
Yeah.
And of course there was a lot of people. This is where a lot of the Masonic theory comes from. The fact that they reckon there were Masonic signs.
I think one of the biggest travesties in the Jack the Ripper historical record kind of is the fact that the victims don't get as much grace or as much talked about when it came to the whole Jack the Ripper discussion. A lot gets centered around who or how, like understanding, obviously, solving the mystery, but we don't really look at the victims and kind of look at their lives a little bit. I think I've been explained to it a couple of times that they were just prostitutes down on their luck or women down on their luck that fit the same description, but they weren't really talked about as they were human.
It's true. It's interesting that you mentioned that. I mean, the very first Jack the Ripper walk that I ever did, which is way back, the tour that I was taken on, they spoke a lot about the women and what their life was like. And I was really surprised because I was expecting it to be about the murders, about who it was. But there was an awful lot spoken about the women and what their conditions were like. And I think that's still the case with a lot of tours, with a lot of the tour guides. In fact, speaking of one of the tour guides, forgive me, I did get my collection of books out before I came on. This is a lovely book, One Autumn in Whitechapel, written by a tour guide. Mick Priestley is a tour guide, and he dedicates his book to the victims. And the dedication reads for Martha, Mary Ann, Annie, Elizabeth, Catherine, Mary, Alice, and Frances. Life dealt you a cruel hand. So he dedicated his book to the victims, and he spent a lot of time with that. So I think a lot of them are sympathetic, and I certainly think Hallie Rubenhold in her book has kind of changed that narrative as well because she didn't talk about Jack the Ripper at all. She spoke about the victims and their lives, and I think that was a refreshing angle.
What about your thoughts on the royal family's involvement? I mean, obviously that comes from, we like to think that somebody in a high position of power is covering up some type of scandal or something like that. That's what really interests me about it. I don't believe it, but I can see where people would think that at first.
It's a hell of a story. Do you know, it really is. It's a hell of a story. But you know what? It's the one that most films and movies tend to end with. If you look at most of the films, they all end with the royal conspiracy. I think there's no evidence to show that Prince Albert Victor was in London for the nights, or certainly some. of the murders. So um, I mean, the royal theory revolves around the fact that he knew Walter Sickert. Walter Sickert was teaching him how to paint, and across the road there was a young girl who used to work in a shop where Prince Albert Victor, used to go, and they fell in love, and the result of that was a child. And that caused a scandal, which means we can't allow this. You can't, this the heir to the throne, and it's I don't know. It doesn't ring true, to be honest. And then sort of find this woman, Mary, who was apparently, so the woman was found and taken away, but Mary Kelly had the baby. She went off with the baby, and they're trying to find Mary Kelly with this baby, and they killed all these women around that. It's an interesting theory. I just don't. It doesn't stack up. Yeah, it doesn't stack up for me. However, if you were to ask me, was Prince Albert Victor involved in the Cleveland Street affair? I think there's very much evidence that he was, and that's well worth reading up on, which was a male brothel in Cleveland Street. And there's allegations there that Prince Albert Victor went in there, but also there were young children involved.
He did eventually get syphilis, right? And went a little
He
crazy.
did. He did. Yeah, he died quite young. He did die quite young. Yeah. Interesting tale, the Cleveland Street scandal. So, I mean, but the Royal Conspiracy, it's one of the biggest selling books ever, Robbie, The Royal Conspiracy, Stephen Knight's book. So very much of interest, but I don't think anybody in the research community really goes for it.
Do you know L. Forbes Winslow? I believe his name is the guy who went to he's like a psychiatrist or something and really started getting media attention by glorifying the fact that it has to be an insane person that committed these crimes or someone with a mental health disorder. And the media was really picking up on that and kind of painting it as like a psychotic, mad killer, bloodthirsty killer. I mean, do we think it's insanity from syphilis or do we think it's insanity from just the person didn't have a good upbringing?
Who knows? I mean, it's really difficult to know, isn't it? We never tracked him down. I think that the theory that he had syphilis I can see where that's coming from, and that has weight for me. Because like I said, if you let syphilis go untreated, it will enter the bloodstream, it'll go to the brain, and it will have a mental effect on you. And I think the one of the questions I first asked when I first got involved was, well, surely there were other murders. What was so special about this one? I mean, there were other murder, but not like this. Not the way that they were mutilated and the body parts taken out, not like that. So I think in order for people to kind of get their heads around it, they think this man must have been insane, and that's I mean, that's probably how they kind of got their heads around it, really.
Has there been any areas in the Jack the Ripper case that you wish there was more and not besides naming a suspect or stuff like that, but do you wish like when it came to records or anything that you could find when it came to available information to fill in certain gaps?
Do you know what? It would be great if all the police records were still available. Because at the moment, most of what we have is from newspaper articles. They wrote up the coroner's report, the coroner's meetings, but we have very little police documentation because, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of those files were destroyed, stolen, or missing. So I think that it'd be great if we had, details of what they did, who they interviewed. It'd be great to see what was the interview with Leather Apron. How did that go? So because if you've got those interview notes, you can kind of get an idea about, well, hang on, this person looks suspicious, but we don't have anything. Most of what we have is from the newspaper reports, and of course they had their own angle as well, I suppose.
Did you find any similarities with the JFK assassination when it came to certain types of things, either with the investigation or just certain slip ups or mistakes or things?
Honestly, I don't see any conspiracy in Jack the Ripper. I mean, there's only one, which is the fact that the Masonic theory, that is the conspiracy really. The fact that the William Gull, again the Royal Conspiracy, and most of the police officers would have been in the Masons. So if one of the Masons had been carrying out these attacks, there may be a reason for the police to hide that evidence and maybe destroy it and make sure to protect one of their own. So I think there's, so there's a conspiracy maybe in potentially in that side of things, but I don't think it's the same because with JFK there's so many questions, there's so many questions about it. It's where's the evidence against Lee Harvey Oswald? We have a lot more documentation than we have for Jack the Ripper, but it's still an awful lot hasn't been shared. A lot of it's been redacted, and I think the narrative has just been passed on. The Warren Street narrative, the Warren Commission narrative has been passed. It's been kind of that the narrative that they set has been just kept going. And I think it's only for people like yourselves in the research community that are refusing to let this die and to keep asking questions and to keep requesting um, documentation. So I really think that the research community in the Kennedy assassination are all heroes because you're keeping it going, and quite rightly so, asking questions. So
Maybe maybe not in your particular case, but I find it fascinating how people in the UK or just do not care about JFK. But then if you talk about like someone in the U.S. If you ask them about Jack the Ripper, they know the name, but they don't have an interest in Jack the Ripper. I'm like, guys, you guys are both looking at stuff where there's not evidence manipulation, but just bungled investigations, or there's a list of suspects, or you don't think, you're trying to go through it. Jack the Ripper's a little older, so it's a little bit more like legend compared to the JFK conspiracy, which has gone down that conspiracy road. But there's like, for me, I see a couple, like a few similarities just when it came to certain areas of investigative work, certain explanations of why this happened there. And some of this, I brought this up with Edward Stowe, and I just thought it was funny because watching someone like kind of look at me like JFK conspiracy, then roll their eyes. I'm like, oh, I need a JFK researcher to understand this, because anyone that looks at it obviously can see the evidence is a little bit funky in that scenario. And I think it's interesting how there's that cultural divide, even though we're both kind of looking at things that we believe do not have an answer. Jack the Ripper is a little bit more solidified that there was not an answer. But there's a list of suspects. The communities are almost exactly the same when it came to infighting of different suspects and individual theories, which I find is hilarious.
yes, it really is. We had a Whitechapel Society committee meeting. We were discussing just that fact, the Facebook pages, and they were talking about how vicious it can be. And I thought, you haven't seen the John F. Kennedy side of things. They're just as vicious, and in that, which is a shame because everybody's wanting the same thing, which is give us an answer. And obviously, I feel we have a chance with the Kennedy assassination. There are documents out there. We just need to kind of see them. And I'm always amazed at why aren't they releasing them. And the other thing, is the prayer man theory. With the video potentially. Why aren't they've got a first generation copy of that? Who is it? CBS or somebody has that? I mean, why don't they release it? It'll be really clear. We could see who was standing in the front of the Tech State Book Depository. So I don't understand what they're hiding. What are they afraid of?
Good old Bart Camp, prayer man.
Bart Camp, yes.
Dealey Plaza UK. I know you guys have talked to him a few times.
Yeah, we have. He's got his opinions. Yeah, but I think it's a really good book. More than a fuzzy picture. It's a really good book. It's very because he focuses a lot on Oswald's escape. Which is interesting as well, where he was in the building and so on, which is interesting. But yeah, I just don't see the conspiracy with the Ripper in the same way as John F. Kennedy. I found out something interesting actually, Robbie. I didn't realize this because I'm reading 4 Days in November at the moment, just so which is from Bugliosi, and obviously he's somebody who believes in the lone shooter, which I don't believe in. But it's a very interesting narrative. But I didn't realize that while he doesn't believe that John F. Kennedy was a conspiracy, he believes that Robert Kennedy assassination was a conspiracy. That's amazing, isn't it?
Well, it's not surprising when I've asked people about it just on the street in public. Everyone I think knows that I have a JFK interest. So like a lot of people that know me sent me text messages when Trump said he's going to declassify files. But it was funny because I'd ask them about the JFK subject and they would kind of roll their eyes. But if you asked like them about the RFK subject, there wasn't any eye rolling. Even with Chat GPT, if you message Chat GPT about it, it'll give you a more conspiratorial answer on the RFK assassination than it will with the JFK one. And I think it's because it's so well known that the LAPD destroyed so much evidence. The only reason that we have Sirhan and not another suspect is because Sirhan admitted to doing it. And that was it. That was case closed. And that's why Bugliosi had problems with it, because he saw a lot of court shenanigans and kind of pressuring a witness or pressuring a suspect, which to me is just interesting. It's like, how are you a conspiracy person in the RFK case, but you're not for the JFK case, man? And it's just like, nope, they just didn't see it.
Yeah, two different things, which is amazing. But yeah, I mean, I must say, I'm enjoying it from a timeline point of view, just to kind of see, And the thing is, this is why I like this Jack the Ripper book, because he does the timeline in this. Usually, when you come to a Jack the Ripper book, they always go for this victim and then this victim, and this is what happened. But he actually does it live. While this was happening over here, that person was over here, and while that person was over there, this person was doing this. So it was kind of ties it together really well. So that's why I kind of enjoyed that one.
Why
But
why have you kept up with the groups or been so involved in like the Whitechapel Society and Dealey Plaza UK? Are you obviously your own interest, but what about the historical accuracy? I find myself now like very hardline with certain conspiracies of the JFK case. Obviously, I would like a document and stuff, and you're not going to have a document that says who did it. But I can tell you through looking at the HSCA audio, there's only 5 witnesses online, and I have all 52 that I'm looking through right now. So it's like hearing them say things compared to reading their testimony. It's all the questions all the conspiracy people wanted to ask. We have Lieutenant Jack Revel saying, I don't know how Jack Ruby got into that basement, but I can tell you not one officer, but 4 said he didn't come down that ramp. For the longest time, it was 1. And then he also says, I could tell you how he could have gotten in. And then he talks about through a side door. So to me, it's like, well, thank God the HSCA in a court said that to the guy and he gave that answer. We have that audio recording because that was not investigated. That wasn't looked through. We also have J. Lee Rankin from the Warren Commission staff say, hey, do you think Jack Ruby killed Lee Harvey Oswald because of patriotic duty? And he goes, I don't even think the Warren Commission believed that. And it's like, what? Like there you got it now. So like to me, the historical accuracy in trying to find out, no matter if it is Lee Harvey in the end or if it's another person added on top, which I do believe, I think looking at it and putting it out there for the public, because as much as you know in the communities, if you're new to the case, like I was at a point, you hop into this. There's so much fighting that you'll be torn apart in the comments before you even get an interest to really want to examine the case further. And I think if, much like with Jack the Ripper, much like with JFK, we have a large interest in it ourselves, and we don't want to see someone else's interest diminish.
yeah, I think the other interesting thing, of course, is and the parallel between Jack the Ripper and Kennedy is the fact there are multiple suspects, is right. You know, so there are multiple suspects in Jack the Ripper that could have been, and but there are also multiple suspects in the John F. Kennedy assassination. I mean, I'm particularly interested in Roscoe White. I found out about him relatively recently. There's a conference that we had in Canterbury where the Roscoe's son was there with 2, well, who I would say were well-respected researchers in the field, and they were putting this forward that they found this box, and in the box that was owned by Roscoe White, he seems to be suggesting that he was one of the guys in the grassy knoll pulling the trigger. What do you think about Roscoe White?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of people afterwards that stated certain facts. It's much like the James Files interview. If you watch that, I mean, he gets Tippett's name wrong. I mean, he gets a bunch of things wrong, and it's like I think it came after the fact. But I think it's Jack White is his son. I know he was interviewed multiple times, and I've heard him talk on a few things. Like I said, I don't know. I've tried my best now just to see what I can prove. I mean, Santos Traficante said that he did it. I think a couple other mob figures said that they did it. So it's very difficult to try and narrow down if any of these confessions that come after the fact. It's much like finding documentation or people saying that they're Jack the Ripper after the fact. It's very, very difficult.
Yeah. What did you think about Russell Edwards' theory? And I was like, it was a very good interview. You know, do you feel the Shawl has got credibility?
I don't know. Like I said, I don't have a suspect in that either. I think I'm trying to hear other opinions on it. And I've seen a lot of people and I've kind of looked more at the DNA evidence. I mean, when you hear DNA evidence linked to certain ancestors or family members that turn, it sounds okay, well, science, DNA evidence. But then if you actually look at it, there's a couple things that weren't done in the study or in the thing to be like, oh, that kind of changes the official thing for me. But I don't know. I think Charles Cross for me is probably the one I'm kind of like looking at a little bit more, just because there's a lot more people that believe that, much like people believe like, I don't know, something like Mac Wallace was the guy who did the LBJ murder of JFK. A lot of people believe that based on certain eyewitness accounts of seeing a man with circular glasses in the 6th floor building. I mean, some people saw 2, but Mac Wallace's fingerprint was found on the 6th floor. So that is, again, a lot of people suspect that more likely as a suspect. It's kind of like that for me. I mean, there's a little bit more evidence or more research in that area, but again, trying to say like I have the answer. I'm not ever going to be in that boat. I think there's going to be stuff revealed 100 years from now after they already name a second suspect. That's going to be like, oh well, that adds more context to the story.
Mm. I think it's interesting. There's a number of people in the society who have written books about sort of Jack the Ripper, and they all say the same thing, that publishers make them say that Jack the Ripper unmasked at last the killer found. But really, they don't believe it. They just think that here's a credible suspect, and here's why I think. So I'm sure there's, it's the same with JFK. There's a number of people who think, and there's the coalition of the willing with John F. Kennedy, isn't it? There were so many people didn't like him, and would the Federal Reserve, of course, the mafia, of course. There's a whole list of them. And I think the other thing with John F. Kennedy, of course, there are so many rabbit holes that you can disappear down if you really want to. The Odeo incident and the Mexico City thing, and you know it's I mean, certainly talking to some of my colleagues in DPUK, they say, well, I can't go down all these rabbit holes. I'm going to focus on the Tippit murder. I'm going to focus on the exit. I'm going to focus on what he's standing in the doorway. And maybe that's the best way to be. Otherwise, you just go mad chasing all these rabbit holes.
I guess with both of them, you find that they've been turned into fairy tales. Jack the Ripper has been turned into more of a myth in the top hat scenario, like we talked about. And then with JFK, there's the whole Camelot thing. There's a lot of things. I mean, obviously, people that were attached to JFK probably feel a need to keep the Camelot thing going. But in my opinion, I think it's caused more hurt because I think a lot of what goes to the Kennedy family wanting stuff private is because of the fact they're trying to keep this image of Camelot. I mean, he's been remembered as that. We learn these things out about affairs, and people get like, "Oh my God, no way! He was my hero." It's like he's a human being.
Human being
A
with
lot of
human frailties.
a lot of people in office weren't like Johnson wasn't the best. But there's a lot of things you start kind of learning that diminish this dream portrait of them. And that's not really the purpose of it. It's kind of understand the facts, understand the historical significance. And for me, I feel like in both cases, this fairy tale image, people are afraid to knock at that wall and tear it down. And when you do that, I think you put up too many guardrails where you're ignoring certain areas that might need to be investigated more. And again, that also goes to the opposite. People investigate them, and then you get things like JFK killed Marilyn Monroe or RFK killed Marilyn Monroe. It's like, I don't believe that, but that's the opposite end of the fairy tale thing, is that they investigate and want it to be the nightmare scenario. It's like, guys, there's a healthy balance where I bet there was a lot of weird things going on. And dude, I'll even draw a correlation to the Natalie Wood death. That one was definitely Hollywood cover up. I mean, I can't understand why Frank Sinatra is not only involved, or his name pops up in the JFK case, his name pops up in the RFK case, and his name pops up in Natalie Wood's death. That to me is like, what are you? I can't listen to your songs anymore.
I mean, I think the other interesting thing with the whole Chappaquiddick affair, you're talking about the cover up and sort of that. Do you think that the Chappaquiddick affair with Edward Kennedy, do you think that was covered up as well for the same reason, to keep the Camelot thing there?
I'd have to look
That
at
was,
it because I haven't touched Edward Kennedy. I mean, for the past year now, I've been looking at the RFK case, and I want to go into the MLK one. But to me, I don't know. I feel like there's always that Occam's razor theory, where it's the more simplest explanation is the reason why. I don't always necessarily think that's the case. A lot of times when you're dealing with certain incidences in like the United States, the government, Dag Hammarskjöld's death, his plane crashed, and the investigation by the Senate it's been 9 times they've looked into it. And their final conclusion is we cannot rule out foul play. There's a video you can watch of this guy. He was a guy who crashed his plane trying to make a peace treaty to another country in Indonesia, trying to bring independence. His plane goes down. The Senate committee said that we think since Allen Dulles and J. Edgar Hoover's reputation has diminished so bad over the years that there might be foul play involved on either the FBI or CIA on his airplane, because one witness survived. All the rest died, but when they found Dag Hammarskjöld's body, it was away from the plane. He was shot, not plane crash. He was shot, and he had an ace of spades in his shirt pocket. The rescue team didn't go out until the morning, so they waited a whole 9 hours to go check out the crash site, and that's where you can see the footage of it. You can see his body; it's clutching like an anthill or grass or something like that. And there's been a lot of like reporters for Washington Post I've spoke to about it. And I think there's an unsolved mystery series about it as well too. Where's the flight logs? It will tell you. Well, the flight logs disappeared. So again, I think when it comes to certain instances, like in over here in our country or in other places that want to hide this certain blemishes or problems or get rid of somebody, like Hale Boggs airplane going missing, I think they're all very reasonable. I think you can make some of the speculation based on certain information and certain historical past for the United States government. But again, if you say it was this person, I don't think that's the right conclusion.
Of course, we're leading now. I'm going to ask you about the Gene Hackman thing because that's a bit mysterious, isn't that?
Gene Hackman?
Gene Hackman's death
Oh, recently?
recently, yeah,
Yeah, with
last
his
week,
wife.
yeah,
I don't know.
yeah, and his dog.
My first thought was carbon monoxide, but then they said it wasn't carbon monoxide, and I was like, did someone poison him? Like,
What happened? Do you know? That's. I guess, do you know what? With that one though, the truth will probably out, and I don't think there's any conspiracy. I don't believe he was involved in any CIA skullduggery or anything like that. But it's just, you have a dog and his wife and Jean all dead in the room. It's like, what the hell happened?
it'd be crazy if it was like a Woody Harrelson's dad thing where it turns out he was the killer of JFK and that he was going to confess and they just wrapped him up. I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying I loved listening to Woody Harrelson in a recent interview. He was talking about his dad doing the whole JFK thing. And I just was dying laughing. I was like, dude, if that ends up being a thing, to quote Don Thomas, rest in peace. He was like, if that answer ends up coming out to be true, I'll slit my wrist. I was just dying laughing.
You write the book, I'll buy it. Okay.
But Mr. Power, I appreciate the time you gave me to do my show and talk about the Jack the Ripper case and a little bit of JFK. Do you mind giving yourself a minute here to be able to promote what links people can find you at? Any book recommendations on Jack the Ripper?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the first link I'd like to give you, and thank you for giving me the opportunity. And by the way, Robbie, I've really enjoyed this. It's been great fun. I've really enjoyed it. I think obviously the Whitechapel Society is where I've learned so much, and you're welcome to join that whitechapelsociety.com, where you'll find out about our next meetings when they're coming up, and we have recordings that we release on Rippercast. Actually, Rippercast, and actually, Robbie, there's a really good episode of Rippercast where they looked at Harry Rubenhol's book. And the main guy on this is Paul Begg. Paul Begg, bless him, lovely man, and he's written extensively on it. So I think the Whitechapel Society, I would say, Casebook Classic Crime is where they discuss in great detail every aspect of the Jack the Ripper. But if you want to start off something nice and easy to get your teeth into, then I really recommend CSI Whitechapel. It's a really good book, and you see Paul Begg was involved in that, and also a guy called John Bennett, who's a terrific author, and the graphics in it are just amazing. They really are kind of CGI. It's a beautifully illustrated book, so it's certainly as a good for a start out. But I mean, it's again nice one to have in your collection. So just if again, just to finish off with the Whitechapel Society, if you do become a member, I think it's £25 a year, you will get a magazine that we produce every 2 months, which talks about not just Jack the Ripper, just all aspects of the history of Whitechapel, which is a fascinating part of London. It's a history of poverty, it's a history of revolution, and it's an interesting area to study. If ever you're over, Robbie, I'll give you a walk down Whitechapel.
I'd appreciate that for sure. Mr. Power, it's been a pleasure talking with you. Hope to speak with you again soon. I'd love to have you back on here to discuss a little bit more about either Jack the Ripper or JFK. But thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Out of the Blanket. Stay tuned for our next episode.